No doubt, we remember the famous question asked in Shalom Aleicham's story as portrayed in Fiddler on the Roof. How are things in Anatevka? The answer, problems. The people of Anatevka have big problems. Tevye's horse has gone lame. Tzeitel loves Muddle the tailor and not Laser Wolf. Huddle is in love with a student who can't support a wife, and the Tsar is putting massive restrictions upon the Jewish people. And so Tevye turns to God and turns to us to voice the troubles which leave him helpless in a changing world. Shalom Aleichem, who wrote about an imaginary town, Anatevka, died almost 100 years ago. But he was speaking not only to his generation, but to ours. The world is changing as rapidly today as it was in Shalom Aleicham's time when he wrote about a fiddler on the roof. Like Tevye, we too feel overwhelmed with all of life's challenges. Maybe we have experienced a great loss, illness, financial woes, failed relationships. We too struggle to find security in a world that is changing so rapidly. The problems of 3 generations ago, although perhaps different in form, they are still our challenges even to this day. We all recognize it. Something is wrong with the mood in America. Despite our scientific advances and our longer lives, we have never been so desperately unhappy. There's a growing discontent with what we have, a dissatisfaction with the lives we have created. We are gripped by the fear that we have become meaningless cogs in the great human enterprise. Like Tevye, we look to our tradition to find answers, and thus to find happiness and purpose and meaning. Happiness, after all, is a Jewish requirement. Deuteronomy teaches us that we should rejoice with all of the good that God has given us. This is the time of year in which we wish each other Shana Tova. Our wish is simple, for ourselves and for each other, that we should be happy. God also wants us to be happy. God's wish for us, you shall rejoice, you shall be happy. The Torah repeats it over and again. Perhaps the first step in finding contentment is to admit that there are times in our lives when we simply cannot be joyful. We grieve, we hurt, we struggle, relying on loved ones and friends and community for comfort. Happiness, like love, is arguably the hardest of all of the commandments to observe. Try telling a parent who has lost a child, v'samachta, you shall rejoice. Or a woman who has been abused, you shall rejoice. Or someone who has just been laid off from a job after 30 years, or a student who has failed out of school. There are times when we simply cannot follow the command to rejoice, nor should we. But Judaism does teach us to handle our despair in stages. Mourning, as an example, moves from the intensiveness of the 7 days of Shiva to the 30 days of Shloshim to the 1-year yahrzeit. Overwhelmed and distraught, we move progressively towards more participation in life, towards finding joy once more. In our day, happiness has become enshrined. It is the supreme goal of all existence. Some seek wealth and others power. Many seek happiness through pleasure. But the more we have and the more we enjoy, the more we want. Our appetites seem only to be whetted but never satisfied. The result is an aching emptiness. We have not yet learned that happiness is not in having, but in being, not in possessing, but in enjoying. From a Jewish perspective, happiness is not something that we find. It is rather a state of being that we create. Happiness is at once nowhere and everywhere. A puppy said to a big dog, I have mastered a philosophy. I have learned that the best thing for a dog is happiness, and that happiness is in my tail. Therefore, I am chasing it. and when I catch it, I shall have it. Said the older dog, I too am convinced that happiness is a fine thing for a dog, and I too believe that happiness is in my tail. But I have noticed that when I chase it, it keeps running away from me. But when I go about my business, it comes after me. We can't find happiness through direct pursuit. Happiness is a potential byproduct of every single thing that we do. In his book, The Geography of Bliss, Eric Weiner seeks to determine what it is that makes people happy. He says, we speak of searching for happiness, of finding contentment, as if these things were locations in an atlas. A few of Weiner's findings. Optimists are happier than pessimists. Those with strong relationships are happier than those who are lonely. People with a college degree are happier than those without. Although, interestingly, those with advanced degrees are less happy than those with a BA. Men and women are equally happy. People are least happy when commuting to work. Busy people are happier than those with little to do. Wealthy people are not much happier than poor people. And my personal favorite, people who attend religious services by a wide margin are happier than those who do not. Weiner's pioneering research also measures which people, which countries in the world are the happiest. He observes that Bhutan in the Himalayas is a country that really cares about its people. In the US, we measure success by the gross national product, but in Bhutan, they measure success by the gross national happiness of their people. The GNH was conceived by King Wangchuck in 1973. It is a concept that represents quite a profound shift about how we think about satisfaction and the obligation of a government to serve its people. We measure what's easiest to measure, not what really matters most in people's lives, a disparity that the gross national happiness seeks to correct. In the end, Weiner concludes that happiness is 100% relational. In other words, our happiness is completely intertwined with other people, family, friends, coworkers, neighbors. So George Burns was wrong when he said happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family in another city. Pleasure in life depends largely upon you. You have the ability to master the attitude that produces contentment. The recipe for happiness is quite complicated, and yet there's an easy recipe for unhappiness. Start feeling sorry for yourself, and from pity comes resentment, from resentment, hostility, from hostility comes conflict, and from conflict, misery. In order to be really happy, we have to have a strong tolerance level for imperfection. What modern psychology teaches us is that happiness depends less on our outward circumstances and more on how we respond from the inside to that outward circumstance. Happiness comes from the verb to happen, implying that happiness is happenstance, that it depends on some kind of mishap from the outside. Certainly there is happenstance in our world, and it causes us so much trouble. The homeless and the hungry and the helpless who mischance has dealt a lot of blows in life, they know about happenstance. But most often, happiness does not depend on what comes from outside, but rather what emerges after we have risen above those negative circumstances. A woman trying to teach her daughter to cope with life put carrots and eggs and coffee beans into boiling water. Taking them out, she said, "Tell me, what do you see?" "Carrots, eggs, and coffee," the daughter said. Her mother brought her closer and asked her to feel the carrots. She did, and they were soft. The mother asked her to take hold of an egg and break it, and after pulling apart the shell, she observed it was a hard-boiled egg. And finally, she asked her daughter, "Sip the coffee." The daughter smiled as she tasted the rich, beautiful flavor. Her mother explained that each of these objects reacted differently. The carrot went into the water strong, unrelenting, However, after being subject to boiling water, it became weak. The egg had been fragile, its thin outer shell protected by its interior liquid. But after sitting in the boiling water, its outside became hardened. The ground beans, however, the coffee beans, were unique. After they were in the water, they had changed the water. When adversity knocks on your door, how do you respond? Like a carrot that seems strong, but with pain and adversity, it wilts and it loses its strength. Like an egg that starts out with a malleable heart, but changes with the heat. Did I once have a fluid spirit, but after a breakup, a divorce, a death, a hardship, have I become hardened? Or are you like the coffee bean, which actually changes the water, the very circumstances that brings it pain? When the hour is the darkest and the trials are their greatest, do you elevate yourself to another level? The happiest of people, they don't necessarily have the best of everything. They just make the most of everything that comes their way. Tonight, the holiest night of the year, I'd like to suggest a prescription for each of us to consider, a way in which we can think about achieving happiness in the coming year. We hear the words repentance, prayer, and tzedakah repeated over and again these holy days. Not only do these values temper judgment's severe decree, but they are also the key ingredients to finding a life of happiness. Repentance leads to happiness only when we resolve to make good choices. The brightest future is always based on a forgotten past. You can't go forward in life until you let go of your past failures, your heartaches. A fellow walked into a newspaper office. He came in to complain that he opened up the paper that morning and he saw his own obituary. He demanded a retraction. The editor said, "Well, we never write retractions, but one thing we can do. We can write a new birth announcement for you, and we can let you start all over."